2024 was not a good year for box office successes. Of course, we got some massive films like Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Moana 2, but we also got many films that did not perform so good. And a couple of articles have popped up pointing the finger at Nepo babies for costing the studios money. Hollywood's Nepo baby directors responsible for the biggest box office flops of 2024. Nepo Bust, how Nepo baby directors made some of the biggest flops of the year, from Red One to The Watchers. But did these films deserve to perform the way that they did? Are Nepo babies to blame for a decline in Hollywood? Or are the titles of these articles being a little bit manipulative? I decided to look into that. I watched 6 radically different films, all made by Nepo babies in the year 2024 to answer these questions. And let me tell you, my opinions are mixed. But first, what is a Nepo baby? How did a baby make a movie? Nepo baby, short for nepotism baby, is a term referring to someone whose career is similar or related to the career their parents succeeded in. The implication is that because their parents already had connections to one or more specific industries, the child was able to use those connections to build a career in those industries. It's definitely been used as more of a negative term, more of a way of diminishing someone, but in more recent years it's become more of a neutral term. A lot of people in Hollywood still don't like it though. Hollywood is absolutely chock full of Nepo babies. Some of these people are looked on really fondly, but others are looked on a little more critically. While researching this video, I found some surprising people who I never even knew fit into this category. There's even nepotism lineages in Hollywood going back over 100 years. Turns out a lot of my favorite actors are Nepo babies, and probably a lot of your favorite actors are too. When we're talking about nepotism in Hollywood, a lot of the time we're referring to the actors. However, today we're specifically focusing on the directors. Now, obviously having parents in the industry is going to be a huge advantage. Even if they only have a small role in the film world, getting your foot in the door can often be the hardest part. There's tons of talented filmmakers who may never get a chance in the industry because of it. Nepo babies also get the wealth of their parents' years of experience. But of course, as a little bit of a downside to being a Nepo baby, depending on how you were raised, is that you may become a little disconnected from the rest of the world, making your films or your writing a little less relatable.
Go around sometimes and I hang out with other people that are my age and they're just kind of just dude, like, oh my god, like, can we talk about like the political and economic state of the world right now?
Now, personally, I don't have an issue with Nepo babies. I think it makes logical sense people who were surrounded by this industry growing up also want to be part of the industry, as opposed to being like an accountant or something. If my dad was Christopher Walken and I was surrounded by people my whole life telling me that I'm going to grow up and be the next Christopher Walken, and I see everyone in the world loves my dad Christopher Walken, I'd probably want to do what he does too, you know? So I'm not a Nepo baby hater by any means. If you're a Nepo baby and you're watching this video, I would love to hang out with your parents. This video isn't me wanting to take down Nepo babies. I genuinely want to enjoy these movies. But also, if you've got an issue with Nepo babies in general, you know, I get it. When it comes to these films, I think constantly comparing them to their parents' works is just going to be a little reductive. Obviously, the whole concept of the video is reductive, but I don't want to make it any more reductive than it already is. I'm only going to make the comparison when the comparison really makes sense to do. There's also going to be some spoilers in the reviews. I'll give a warning in each thing when I'm about to start spoiling stuff, but generally, if I spoil something, it's because I don't like it and I don't respect it. We're also going to be talking about the budget and the box office for each film. They usually don't account for the marketing costs in the budget. If a film's budget was $100 million and then it made $100 million in the box office, it doesn't mean that film came out net even. They potentially just lost $50 million. Alright, let's take a look. Did these Nepo baby movies deserve to perform the way that they did in the box office? Lisa Frankenstein was directed by Zelda Williams, who is the daughter of comedian Robin Williams. And unfortunately, this is one of the films listed in the articles as being a box office flop. The Focus Features film cost $13 million, well above the going rate for a novice. Its global haul topped off at $10 million after it opened in February. I honestly think the language used here is maybe a little bit unfair. There's no doubt that this is a low-budget film. While I would love $10 million, and I think I could make that go really far for a movie that's not really a lot, and while it is Zelda Williams' first feature-length film, they're not exactly new to directing. They're not even remotely new to the film space. I don't know, this budget to me for this kind of feature-length film, it doesn't seem crazy, especially for a director with this kind of history. This is a horror rom-com starring Katherine Newton and Cole Sprouse. That's the Riverdale Sprouse, not the My Fake Boyfriend Sprouse. It's also written by Diablo Cody, who notably wrote Jennifer's Body. They've even stated that this film takes place in the same universe. Does this come into play at all in the movie? No, but it might have been weird if it did, because this movie movie takes place in 1989. Lisa Swallows is not fitting in high school, and this is partially because she's traumatized by her mother's violent death to an axe murderer 2 years prior. To make matters worse, her father has since remarried, and her stepmother is a bit crook to her. One night, a mysterious event reanimates the body of a handsome young bachelor whose grave she frequents, and now she's got to stop anyone from finding out about him and prevent him from decaying. This film had some pretty mixed critic reviews, but overall a positive audience score. I think that makes a lot of sense. This film just screams cult classic. Up front, it does feel a lot like one of the old Tim Burton films. Think Beetlejuice or Edward Scissorhands. It feels also very reminiscent of Heathers. Big 80s vibes all around. And what I really liked about the movie is that it did feel really loved. It's a love letter to this whole era of film, which I really appreciated. When watching this, I didn't feel like Zelda Williams just loved this movie. I felt like she loves movies. It's absolutely chock full of references going back all the way to, obviously, original Frankenstein. It's also one of those films where you can really tell that the whole cast was having a really fun time shooting it. Like, they had a lot of freedom to try things in multiple different ways. It makes for some really interesting moments and reactions. If I had one complaint about this movie, it's that I wish it took things just a little bit further. I would have liked to see it push some boundaries a little more, whether that be making it a little more gruesome or just a little more surprising in how the plot develops. I'm not sure. It just feels like it needed a little more of something to set it apart. It is really good. It's got some really good funny moments, but it's just a little too formulaic. So maybe a little too much like stuff we've already seen before. Overall, I had a good time with it. It felt nostalgic in a way. And while this did underperform at the box office, I definitely feel like it's really going to pick up with streaming. I think it's one of those films that just takes a little more time to find its audience. And again, in terms of film, this was such a small budget already. It came pretty close. This is hardly a disaster. I would recommend this to someone if you're looking for something a little more lighthearted, but still a little gross, something a bit more unserious. And again, if you liked films like Edward Scissorhands or Beetlejuice or Heathers, you're probably going to like this. Yeah, it's alright. While I was talking earlier about the lineage of nepotism that goes back over 100 years, I was of course talking about the Coppolas. The most notable Coppola is Francis Ford Coppola. I'm talking about The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Bram Stoker's Dracula. You know the guy. But there's other people in this family tree who I never even fathomed were related. For example, Nicolas Cage is a Coppola. He changed his name specifically to avoid the nepotism remarks. He's like one of my favorite actors, and I didn't even know. He named himself after Luke Cage, which is just iconic. You know who else is a Coppola? Jason Schwartzman. That's crazy. Unfortunately, 2024 was not a good year for the Coppolas. We've been talking in this video about 2024 box office failures, but none even compare to Megalopolis, Francis Ford Coppola's magnum opus that he's been trying to get made since the 80s. This guy had to sell part of his winery to get this thing made, only for critics to absolutely trash it and for it to lose well over $100 million at the box office. Can you imagine having to sell part of your winery? That's messed up. So Megalopolis is not actually the movie that I'm reviewing here today. I haven't seen it. It's not mentioned in the Nepo Baby Flop article, so I'm not bloody watching it. Instead, I watched his granddaughter's film, Gia Coppola's The Last Showgirl. For The Last Showgirl, Gia Coppola did not have to sell part of a winery. The film had a $2 million budget, and one of the ways they kept the film costs low is by filming the whole thing in 18 days. Now, obviously, this is not your average Hollywood low-budget movie. It's got a cast full of Hollywood A-listers and a song by Miley Cyrus. This film is Nepotism Manifest. It also barely released in 2024. The planned full release for this film was in mid-January. However, to get it to qualify for the Academy Awards, they released it in one cinema in mid-December. Unfortunately, I believe it did not get any Academy Award nominations. Now, as of recording this in Australia, it actually hasn't had a full release. I managed to go to some kind of early screening thing, not like a cool exclusive one, like one where I still had to pay $15 to see it, but this is the only one out of all the movies I watched for this that I actually got to see in cinemas. It's currently sitting at $4 million in the box office. I'm sure it's going to make much more than this, but already on paper here, this film has made money. Pamela Anderson plays Shelley, a showgirl who has performed at a casino for the last 3 decades in Razzle Dazzle. But art is changing, and when the show is suddenly cancelled, she struggles to both navigate her past and plan her future during the closing weeks. Off the top here, I do want to say that I did really like this movie. I definitely don't think that it's going to be for everyone. It's not shot like a regular movie. For the most part, it's a handheld, very shaky camera. It's all over the place. The whole film is very grainy. At a lot of points, the camera feels like it's not properly focused. A lot of people are going to find this incredibly distracting. I was not one of those people. I kind of feel like this filming technique was partially done to disguise the fact that this film was shot in only 18 days. But again, I didn't mind it. It made everything feel a lot more personal. A little claustrophobic as well. It made me feel like I was there in the scene. The writing in this film also at times is a little weird. It's got the subtlety of a brick. People are very clear about their feelings all of the time. One reason I personally didn't mind this is that to me, it made the whole thing read a bit like a theater production. From the way it's paced to the way people talk, how they performed, the largeness of the characters. I honestly don't know how to describe it very well. Something that I just couldn't get out of my head while watching it. So far, this is not much of a recommendation, more of a warning. So let's talk about something that makes the film undeniably great. It's the acting. Every single actor in this film just brings it up to the next level. Brenda Song and Jamie Lee Curtis absolutely fall into their roles. Dave Bautista is literally proving that he can do anything. Also, in my opinion, the best he's ever looked. Kiernan Shipka worked the hell out of this year, and I've always said it, is an actor to look out for. And of course, you can't talk about the movie without talking about Pamela Anderson. Her performance in this is reason alone to watch this movie. Absolutely perfect casting, and she just puts her heart and soul into every single scene. The performances in this movie really carry things over the line for me. So it's not lost to me here how much of this film relies on the cast. This film succeeds so well for me because of the acting, not because of how it was shot. Most small budget films are not able to acquire a cast of icons and Academy Award winners. And I'm not saying that unknown actors can't be talented, but it is very easy to see how nepotism came into play with this one. One thing I really liked about the characters is that none of them are presented as being perfect, nor is anyone perfect or even close to perfect by the end of the film. It seemed to me while reading reviews of this, one thing a lot of people had an issue with is the ending. I think a lot of people were hoping to take away something different from this movie, which I think is perfectly understandable. I think what helped with me was my mindset going in. How I viewed it is that we're looking into one of the most important transitional moments in someone's life. Everything she's ever worked towards, something she sacrificed everything for. Her whole life so far is coming to an end. And that's what we're getting. We're getting a window into the most significant moment of her life. I do have one big complaint though about this movie. There are too many transitional scenes of Pamela Anderson dancing in the Las Vegas sunset. Once or twice, I could get behind that, maybe 3 times, but they just did a little too much. I also think it could have gone on a little longer. There's some relationships there that I think could have been explored just a little more. Now, I thought out of all the films in this video, this is the one that I would enjoy the least. But surprisingly, I think it's the one I got the most out of. I do think this movie was a really good film-going experience. When I left the cinema, everyone seemed to have really enjoyed it. Everyone had big smiles on their face. It felt, at least in my cinema, that a lot of people got a lot out of this. I'm honestly kind of surprised this didn't get nominated for anything, because it was good. You know, Pamela Anderson was good. The Miley Cyrus song, good. I don't know, man. So for the most part, I love M. Night Shyamalan films. I love Signs. I love Unbreakable. I love The Beach That Makes You Old. I love Stuart Little. I even love The Happening. And 2024 was the year of him telling the world, I love my daughters. Not only did one of them feature in his film Trap, but for his daughter Ashana, he fully financed her directorial debut with The Watchers. Someone is often willing to give the spawn of Hollywood's A-list more than needed. For her feature directorial debut, Ashana Night Shyamalan secured a $30 million budget for the supernatural horror movie The Watchers. An extraordinary sum for a first-timer. Despite a release from New Line Cinema Warner Bros. In the summer corridor, the Dakota Fanning starrer pulled in just $33 million worldwide, with a disastrous C- cinema score. So yeah, interestingly here, M. Night Shyamalan has been self-financing his own films for years. It allows him creative freedom to be provocative without putting any partners at risk. So here, he did the same thing for his daughter. The film later on got picked up by Warner Brothers for $30 million. And yeah, at the box office, it didn't perform. Kind of no matter how you look at it here, critically and in regards to the money. Ashana Shyamalan has actually talked pretty extensively about nepotism in regards to this film. It's something that I consider and have considered every day in the process. She said that discussions around nepotism were totally valid, and that what was important was the reaction to the privilege. By nature of being born into this life and having a parent in the industry, there's definitely a sort of advantage into stepping into the field. You just have to have that sense of being able to achieve it. I think as with any child pursuing their parents' field. I honestly really appreciate these remarks. It feels super honest, and I think it's the perfect mentality to have. But what about the movie? What's this guy about? While transporting a parrot from a pet store to to a zoo, Mina's car breaks down in a seemingly endless forest in the Irish wilderness. She finds shelter with 3 strangers who tell her that every night, mysterious entities named Watchers hunt them if they attempt to leave. When trailers first came out for this film, I was honestly really intrigued by the imagery. It really let my imagination run wild. I love horror movies, so I went into this with certain expectations. I was very intrigued by these unseen Watcher entities. And I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty disappointed after watching this guy. It's not really a horror movie per se. It's kind of like a horror movie in the same way that Hunger Games is a horror movie, which is to say it's not. But it kind of feels like they're on the same level of scary, which is a huge shame because I feel like this had really good potential to be a legitimately creepy horror movie. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm flexible, you know, I can adjust. Me liking this movie wasn't hinging on the fact that it's scary. Unfortunately here, there's a lot of other issues. For starters, the dialogue. Good heavens, the dialogue. It is rough. Everyone says exactly what they're thinking, flatly, all of the time. And it's not like these are bad actors by any means. These are people who have proven themselves to be good actors. But all the delivery is just so flat. Characters are just so washed out and unbelievable. Most of them barely have any personality at all. A good narrative shows but doesn't tell. For some reason, this movie decides to do both of those things constantly. Something will be revealed like visually or in the undertones of the dialogue, and then characters will just verbally explain what happened. It's like I'm watching with audio descriptions on, and I will admit, this is a big issue in a lot of the father's films as well. But for this one, I don't know, it's all over the place. Sometimes it's slow and meandering, and then sometimes characters just make the biggest leaps in judgment that I've ever seen. For the rest of this review, I'm gonna do spoilers, so just like, you know, cover your ears if you care about this movie. So like halfway through the movie, what the Watchers are is finally revealed. If you know anything at all about Irish folklore, you probably guessed what they are. The Watchers are fairies or changelings. And the reason they watch the humans is because they're studying them. They're trying to get better at replicating the humans. Because like 1,000 years ago, they got locked underground by the humans, and they've been spending the whole time crawling back up, so they gotta relearn how to do their stuff. In this, they kind of just look like tall, skinny fellas who scamper around a bunch. Now, I feel like a changeling is one of the easiest things to make scary. Doppelgangers are scary. This has been proven in films time and time again. Imagine you're walking through the forest at night, and you see someone in the distance who looks just like your friend, but they look a little bit off. Or you see yourself leaning out from behind a tree, smiling back at you. Ah! Good grief. I'm giving myself a chill just thinking about that. But again, instead of showing, they tell you. It's not really used creatively, they just use it to info dump on you. That's literally what they do. The big changeling reveal is an exposition dump.
The things of legend and lore, they go by many names. Changelings.
They don't really utilize the changeling thing until it's already been explained. There's also this whole other aspect of the forest that is never fully explained, that it tricks people and makes them see hallucinations. I don't know why they did this. It feels like this could have been explained as being a changeling thing as well, but it's not. At one point in the movie, the fairies have had enough and they start breaking down the house, and while frantically moving all the furniture around, they discover there's been a hatch under the mat the whole time. These people have been in the house for months and have only now just decided to check under the mat. Even the main character, who has drawn all over the floor. She never moved the mat out of the way. Is she stupid? Under here, there's a big bunker, and a professor explains in a video that he built the bunker to study the changelings. That 1,000 years ago, humans warred against the fairies and sealed them deep underground, and that they've dug their way out, but they're still trapped in the forest. But how did the professor build the bunker? He's just one guy. Well, you see, what he would do is he would hire 13 people, bring them out by boat into the forest, where they would work on the bunker, and then every night would be torn apart by the fairies. So you might think of maybe a couple of issues with that. 13 people a day is a lot of people to go through. How long did the filmmakers think it takes to build a bunker? Because they did all of this without machines. In absolute best case scenario here, this took a year to build, meaning that's only 4,745 people dead. There is going to be a massive labor shortage in Ireland. The scheduling alone for this is a logistical nightmare. And when you're constructing something, you don't just show up and do it. You plan things. Each team would have to come in and give you a quote. They're building a self-sufficient underground bunker. This is highly skilled labor. You don't just show up on the day and make it up, especially if it's half done. You gotta show up and work out what's already been done, what hasn't been done yet. Do these people know anything about manual labor? Because I certainly don't. They also established that it takes a whole day to walk from the water to the bunker. So how the hell did they have any time to do any building? By the time they get there, it would be killing time. Why wouldn't they just make it close to the water? That would be so much more efficient for the professor. He'd just need one team. He could get them shipped home by nightfall. He could even go home whenever he wanted. The film is just chock full of narrative choices like this that take me right out of it. Character motivations making no sense, things happening for the sake of happening, and way too much lore-heavy exposition just taking me right out of it. Now look, I haven't read the book. This is based on a book, so maybe this is all issues with the book. But if these are issues in the book, then maybe, maybe don't make it a movie. But a lot of these decisions made in the movie made me feel like it was a little bit unloved, which might be unfair to say. But what I really like in a movie is you can tell that a lot of thought has been put into them, whether it be a really tight script or a really specific vision. For me, this film had kind of none of that. And look, this is a pretty big budget for such a young director, especially for a debut. I think there's a lot here that is visually really, really good. And I really do look forward to what's next in their career. Just this one, I really didn't like. Who watches the Watchers? I kind of suggest that you don't. This might be good for like a younger teen who's not really ready for horror yet, but wants to get their ankles in it. You know what I'm saying? Next movie. Blink Twice I thought was a really interesting movie, but even now, a month later, I'm still not really completely sure how I feel about it. So I'm hoping talking about it now is going to help me kind of piece that together a bit. It's a psychological thriller written and directed by Zoe Kravitz, who's the daughter of Lenny Kravitz and Lisa Bonet. Yet the news wasn't all bad for Nepo baby directors and executives in 2024. Zoe Kravitz scored a hit with the psychological thriller Blink Twice. The $20 million Amazon movie, which opened in August and marked her first turn behind the camera, finished its run with 46 million worldwide. So yeah, box office success. Hooray! Not sure why it's mentioned in the article talking about box office flops, but what the heck, thought I'd check it out anyway. Waitresses Frida and Jess are working an exclusive event when they cross paths with billionaire tech mogul Slater King. After hitting it off, he invites them to come on a trip to his private island with all his rich friends. While everything on the island seems idyllic, gaps in their memory and strange occurrences lead to doubt about the true nature of the island. Out the gate here, I want to say that this sounds like an absolute nightmare for me. Hanging out on an island with a bunch of rich people I don't know, being forced to do group activities. This is my introvert nightmare. How the hell am I meant to relate to these people in any way? Just a warning, very mild spoilers incoming now about this movie. There's plenty of twists in this that I'm not going to be talking about, but there's kind of one specific aspect that's going to be too hard to avoid when talking about this. This film kind of goes in the direction that I think a lot of people are going to expect with news cycles around Epstein Island and the like, but I really don't believe that this knowledge detracts from the film in any way. It's not reliant on this being a shocking twist. There's a lot more things going on in this movie that are surprising. If anything, the film is trying to play into the knowledge that you already have. The film on Amazon even begins with a trigger warning about the contents of the movie. The promotional material looks like this. In my opinion here, they're not really trying to hide anything in regards to who you shouldn't trust in this movie and what this movie is gonna be about. At times, specifically towards the beginning of the film, it is legitimately very chilling. I think it does an amazing job at building up that tension and mystery. It's always giving you just enough information to be terrifying. There's so many little off-putting details, foreshadowing. In this aspect, I think it is really well crafted. I think the best movies are the ones that touch on a variety of genres. I think it's good when horror or thriller films have legitimately funny moments. I think there's a certain point in this film where it becomes maybe a little too jokey. I had a bit of tonal whiplash that I struggled to get past, especially when it's dealing with such serious themes. I think some things were maybe handled a little too lightly as the film progresses, and it loses that incredibly tense atmosphere that was set up earlier in the film. I think I do understand why they went down this route. In my opinion, I just think it could have maybe been balanced a little better. The acting in this film is really good all around. around. The choices for actors was really deliberate. I watched this interview with Zoe Kravitz where she talks about the choice behind making Channing Tatum the billionaire tech mogul Slater King, and she talks essentially about how he's such a charming guy and he's often cast that way. So it makes it a little more impactful when it's revealed that maybe he sucks. And you can tell this mentality went around for a lot of the casting, putting people in roles, in situations that you might not expect from them. But in saying all this, I think there were a lot of characters in this film that were undercooked, and that maybe some of these people were just in the film to kind of fill it out a little more. Some of the characters I thought brought up really interesting avenues to be explored, which ultimately were unfulfilled. I thought the workers on the island were maybe, if anything, a little offensively portrayed, especially considering there could have been more parallels drawn between them and the main characters who also work as staff. A lot of the plot as well, without any spoilers, is maybe a little too convenient, maybe even a little too basic. When a movie is clever in so many ways, it really stands out when some aspects are not so clever. The ending as well kind of tonally felt a little off base. If you've seen it, maybe you know what I'm talking about there. It might sound like I'm being nitpicky with a lot of this, but I just kind of feel like a lot of the aspects in regards to the plot of this movie didn't hit the mark for me. I think overall as a directorial debut, this is really good, and I do look forward to what Zoe Kravitz is gonna do next. I think the film is beautifully shot. I think the acting is really good. You can definitely tell this film came from someone who's been working in the industry for years. There's a really specific vision in mind. They seem really knowledgeable, and there's a lot of things that I'm picking up on a rewatch that bring it to the next level. I can see some people really enjoying this. I can see some people not. I think if this film came out 5 years ago and the path was a little less traveled, this film would have felt much better. For me personally, there was more good than bad here. So this movie is the biggest on paper box office flop that we're going to talk about today. Let us read an excerpt from the Variety article. It can take just a generation for a family name to go from Oscar darling to Razzie frontrunner. Jake Kasdan's Christmas-themed Red One landed in theaters on November 15th, with a thud louder than Santa's sleigh hitting a rooftop. For Kasdan, the son of four-time Oscar nominee Lawrence Kasdan, the Red One reviews were even harsher than the box office, with the film receiving a 30% score on Rotten Tomatoes. So yeah, critically, as the article says, this film was absolutely eviscerated. But interestingly, the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, actually pretty good. So the director Jake Kasdan has been directing for years, with some of his most notable work being the recent Jumanji movies. And frankly, those were huge. They're also the same kind of wacky that Red One is, so it absolutely makes sense that they got him to direct the movie. If you're not aware of his father Lawrence, he co-wrote some of the Star Wars films and one of the Indiana Joneses, Raiders of the Lost Ark specifically. But also, if we're being honest, not everything he made was good either. They kind of talk about him like he never made a bad movie, which I'm pretty sure he did. But let's talk about Red One, and am I leaning more towards the critic score here or the audience score? This movie had some really good ideas and a lot of really bad ideas, and what feels like a setup for a cinematic universe that was maybe doomed from the start. I think if I was much younger, I would have absolutely loved this movie. Honestly, from concept alone, it seems like the kind of movie that I should love now. But if I'm being honest, I thought it was kind of terrible. It is aggressively stupid. For example, there's penguins in the North Pole. Isn't that the most ridiculous thing that you ever heard? Silly. Obviously, I don't actually care about that. You know, let the penguins have jobs. It probably didn't help that there was so much behind the scenes drama with this movie. Reportedly, there was some days where The Rock was 8 hours late to set, thus adding onto the budget $50 million, although this has kind of been a bit disputed. There was also reports of him urinating into bottles on set, and these reports he confirmed. So there you go. Now I'm going to be talking about spoilers for this movie, but I honestly don't think any spoiler I could give could possibly detract from the experience of this movie. Even if you're going to like this movie, I don't think any knowledge of the plot will detract from that. Okay, so the general idea of the movie is that Santa, who was played by J.K. Simmons, is kidnapped on Christmas Eve, and it's up to Callum Drift, played by Dwayne Johnson, and Jack O'Malley, played by Chris Evans, to save him. Dwayne Johnson is the head of the ELF, the Enforcement, Logistics, and Fortification Division. Essentially, he's Santa's security team. He's one day from retirement because he's become disillusioned with the human spirit. Adults have become too bad, and the naughty list grows every single day. I am not sure why he cares about this. He's the head of security, not customer complaints. Jack O'Malley is some guy who is a bounty hunter or a tracker or something. Essentially, he's the best in the world at finding. But he's kind of new to this whole world. He got dragged into it after unintentionally giving information that led to Santa's kidnapping. Now, I used to be a bit of a Dwayne Johnson enjoyer. I think this is one of Dwayne Johnson's least enjoyable roles ever. He's playing that character that he sometimes plays, who is a man who is mildly annoyed by his goofy co-star, but something about it this time makes him seem so unfun. Like he's just sucking the joy out of every scene. I'm not sure if it's because of how this role was written, or it's because of how he was playing it. I feel like there was a lot of potential with this character. A serious straight man in this kind of whimsical Christmas world. But it just doesn't really work for the most part. There's like 2 scenes in this where they utilize that aspect well, and it's legitimately really funny. But for the most part, he just comes across as bitter. To make matters more confusing, he is the head of the ELF, but he himself is not an elf. Because these guys are elves, I assume. But also he says he's not human, so it's not really clear what he is. What is clear in this is that someone who was making this film really liked the movie Ant-Man. They thought, this is sick. Wouldn't it be good if we just did all the same stuff? Dwayne Johnson can turn to the size of a toddler for some reason, which he utilizes in combat. And he also has the ability to turn toys to life, which results in things like making Hot Wheels regular size. There's a whole scene where he's gearing up with toys that they might need to use, and he's got like a slinky and a Monopoly board and a hammer. And the whole movie I'm thinking, how are these gonna come into play? And then the answer is, they just don't. They Chekhov's gun to Slinky and it never went off. I guess it was just product placement or something. There's a joke in the film where Chris Evans wants to turn a Wonder Woman doll to life. The Rock says that it doesn't work like that. But clearly, it does work like that, because later on in the film he turns a chicken to life and its name is Ellen for some reason. I think this concept of making toys real could have been utilized a lot better, rather than it mostly amounting to making toy car big. It feels like there's a really easy joke here with like a sticky hand or a barrel of monkeys or Nerf guns or water pistols. You know, that writes itself. Literally infinite possibilities. There's some genuinely entertaining dialogue in this movie. Chris Evans is absolutely working his ass off trying to make this film work. It also features J.K. Simmons and Kiernan Shipka, who I will love both of them in anything that they do ever. I honestly wish both of them had more to do in this movie because neither of them got to do much. Again, my main issue in the film is how aggressively stupid it is. In this film, they're being overseen by a group named Mora, who are a secret global entity that balances the order between the mythical world and our world. This is being run by Lucy Liu, who they clearly wanted to set up as some kind of Nick Fury type to build a cinematic universe. When they first bring in Chris Evans to get information out of him, we see they've already brought in the Headless Horseman, and they state that they're bringing in all the usual suspects. Then later on in the film, after questioning Nick Kroll, he reveals that the person who likely kidnapped Santa was Grilla the Christmas Witch. She is a shape-shifting witch who eats naughty children on Christmas. Why the hell was she not a usual suspect? Why would they get the Headless Horseman in? She's a Christmas witch! They need to track her down, so Lucy Liu asks regular man Chris Evans how he would do it. And he's like, normally I would track people's credit cards, but maybe for witches there's a different way to do that. So they proceed to pinpoint every single place unlicensed magic was recently used in the world by satellite. Why would they just not do that in the first place? Why did they need Chris Evans to prompt that? This feels like the absolute first thing you would do. The CGI alternates between being pretty impressive to absolutely garish. There's a really interesting scene halfway through the movie where they go and visit the Krampus. Krampus is Santa's adoptive brother, but they had a big falling out. Also, for some reason, Krampus is not one of the usual suspects. You know, the evil Christmas guy. Not a usual suspect. Anyway, this whole section of the movie, the whole thing, every single character looks like it was made with practical effects. I really love practical effects. I thought this was so fun, but it's almost jarring to see in this film considering how much CGI was used in it previously. Felt like I was watching a completely different movie. I think if they wanted this to work a little better, they should have maybe sprinkled some more practical characters throughout the film. It kind of felt like someone crammed a scene from Labyrinth in the middle of Avatar. There are some wild creative choices in this film that I really liked, like making Santa jacked, and there being this guy who's a polar bear, and that's his whole deal. He's just a polar bear. He hangs out. He's not in the movie much. I honestly really wanted to like this movie while watching it. You know, I didn't, but I do think there's going to be a lot of people out there, specifically younger people, who are going to like this. If you have any interest in watching this movie, honestly, I wouldn't wait till Christmas. I think you could just do this one whenever. It's definitely like a Christmassy movie, but it's more of a running around the world romp. On a budget of $250 million, this made $185 million in the box office. Now, obviously, this may read as a flop, but honestly, it's kind of not. This film was originally made exclusively to stream on Amazon Prime. It was only after the movie was made did they decide to do a theatrical run, because why wouldn't you really? Also, apparently, Dwayne Johnson kind of pushed for this as he thought it would be sick on IMAX screens. So yeah, technically a flop, but also never really intended to be a success. During the Christmas period, you could just watch it on Prime. So why would you go to the cinema? It's honestly a Christmas miracle that it made the amount that it did. So another film talked about in one of these articles is Please Don't Feed the Children. This is the directorial debut of Destry Spielberg, the daughter of Steven Spielberg. This isn't out yet properly, so I haven't watched it. It's supposedly technically premiered in October of last year, but it's had some early financial troubles which have prevented it from coming out. So it hasn't really flopped yet. It's just not out. They also talk about Saturday Night, the SNL movie. This movie's by Jason Reitman, who is the son of Ivan Reitman of Ghostbusters fame. This film got $10 million on a $30 million budget. It was only given a limited release and supposedly only had a small marketing budget. It seems Sony kind of expected it to not do very well. That might be because SNL's very American. It kind of doesn't have that global traction. Kind of a similar issue to Better Man, but reversed and not nearly as disastrous. Personally, I didn't hear anything at all about this film. I think they probably did this more to celebrate the 50th anniversary of SNL rather than expecting this to do very well at the box office. All this being said, there's one very notable film that I know of that was kind of conveniently left out of these articles. A film that profited a considerable amount by someone who definitely could be defined as a Nepo baby. I'm talking about Longlegs, directed by Osgood Perkins. Osgood Perkins is the son of Anthony Perkins, who's probably most notable for playing Norman Bates. The director's actually got another movie coming out really soon called Monkey, which honestly just looks incredible. I'm really excited for this one. Longlegs had a budget of $10 million, but ended up bringing close to $130 million at the box office. So really, really good return on investment there. Now, I didn't exactly watch this one for the video. I watched this months ago because I wanted to. I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was really good. I didn't love the ending, but I think as a whole, it was a really good experience. Nicolas Cage in it is insane. I absolutely love it. Also, Kiernan Shipka was in this, making this the third time she's appearing in this video. That's right, 3 Nepo baby films in 2024. I honestly didn't even recognize her in this one. I do think it's interesting that they missed this one in the articles, as I think this film has the best return on investment for a horror film in 2024, at least to my knowledge. But even not including this film, we can kind of see here that most of these Nepo baby movies didn't do that bad at all. 2 of them definitely made a profit here. There are a lot of actual box office flops last year. In reality, these Nepo baby films are barely a drop in the ocean. There's a lot more out of touch money men right at the top, who don't have a creative bone in their body and just want to give us slop. What I will give these movies is at least all of them were trying to do something creative, trying to do something inspired, except for maybe Red One. I think most of these films, bar The Watchers, probably performed exactly as the studios expected. I'd love to know any of the thoughts that you have about any of these films that we talked about today. Is there any films I missed? Who's your favorite Nepo baby? Mine's probably Jack Quaid. He seems nice. If you like this video, you might like the video where I watched every single BuzzFeed movie, or another video where I talk about Nepo babies getting eaten by lions.